actually written down the side of that drawing over there. Okay, so the upper floor roof framing plan, we want to use each story. The roof story, yep, okay, because that's where it needs to be created from our roof story, yep, happy with that? So when we do the lower floor roof framing plan, what are we going to use that time? The first floor story, yep. So again, you've got to get this right, because if you drag the wrong story across, it's all up the, it's not going to be right, is it, obviously? So we want to get that right in the first place, it's picking the right story. So that's where we start from. So we've got to be able to bring up our organizer, and we know we have to have our project map on the left and view map on the right, and wherever we're putting it into our documentation, the first thing we're going to do is drag across and put wherever you want to put it. Moment, we'll just put it here. That is the first thing we do. Bring the right story across into our view map. Yep. It's the way we're going to set up every single drawing. You have to understand what story you're picking it from, bring it across. We can close this down because it's now in here written as roof. So what's the first thing we do? The very first thing we do, number one, rename it. Because at the moment we've brought across, it's just called roof. Okay, so we're now going to call this upper floor or upper level, whatever you want to call it. Can't remember what we're going to call it. Roof framing plan. And once you've done that, that will stay that name forever. Unless you want to change it, you now know what drawing you're going to use. Yeah? That's your starting point. What's the second thing we do? Settings, thank you. So we go to our settings. And what are we going to call this one? Plan, roof, framing. We're doing the framing of it. So when you do the roof plan, with the cladding and everything, that'll be the plan roof one. But we're going to do plan roof framing. Scale? What do you reckon? 1 to 50?
100.
Floor plans, 1 to 50. Roof framing, 1 to 50. Roof plan, 1 to 50. Mid-floor framing plan, 1 to 50. Foundation plan, 1 to 50. Subfloor framing plan, 1 to 50. 1 to 50, 1 to 50, 1 to 50. Okay? Generally, that's all our working drawings for all those kind of plans are 1 to 50. Yep. Entire model. We leave it in colour. Why do we leave it in colour? Because colour is our friend, because colour is line weights. 03, 04 makes no difference. There are no markers. There's no markers. We haven't got windows and doors or anything. So it doesn't matter. You can change it to 04 if you want to. Doesn't matter. No overrides, no renovation, and somewhere down here, just check what that one is, to the fit-in window. Yeah? Okay, so we've now set up all the settings we need, and unless you go back into that settings box, they will stay like that forever. If you do no other drawings with that layer combination, whatever we turn on or off here does not affect any other drawing. It'll only affect one other drawing. What other drawings are going to affect? The lower level roof framing plan, because the lower level roof framing plan will have the same layer combination. Because it's exactly the same drawing, just at a lower level. Does that make sense? So those two will have the same layer combination, because they're exactly the same drawings. One happens to be the upper and one has to be the lower. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? So this is, every single drawing goes through this. Drag across the right story, rename it, set up the settings. Yeah? And we can actually, for something like this, do one last thing now. We can go to our Control L, whatever's on this one, Control L, bring up our things. Now if I turn all of these off, how do I turn all these off? I'm trying to remember, Control A I think it is. Let's bring them all up, not sure. Control A. Sorry, 26 has changed from 25. Before you used to have a series of buttons that'll let you do all that. So I think if we turn everything off, does that turn everything off and go okay? That hasn't turned everything off, has it? What's it left on? ArchiCAD. That's interesting. So my question is, what are these things on? Okay, so these things haven't turned off because they're not on the right layer, are they? They're on ArchiCAD. The only layer you can't turn off is ArchiCAD. So again, as you draw, make sure you're putting everything on the right layers. Yeah? So our roof covering, so we'll do our roofs first. We'll just get this sorted. That's a roof, Control A. They're turned off because they're on the right layer. So I'll just highlight all of these and I'm just going to put them on. What do you reckon they should be on?
Roof.
Design, roof. Roof, where are they? Design roof coverings, yep. That's our roof coverings. So, nothing's shown. So you can do this because we control which layers we want to use, okay? So for doing the framing, the trusses, in this case, these are trusses, aren't they, for this upper roof? Yeah? Happy with that? Trusses? What do you think we're going to draw them on in terms of a layer? What layer are we going to pick? Okay, this is what you guys have to do all the time. You're going to decide what you want them on. Okay, so there isn't one called design roof trusses, but there's one called design roof beams. That'll do. However, we could go, oh, just, you know, there's a million of these things. Do we want more? Well, okay, let's just, for this sake, put in a new one called design roof framing. Okay, so you need to set up exactly the same. It's under custom. So when it's saying custom here, it is not good because we can't update. So I'm just going to go okay for the moment. I'm going to go out of that drawing, go back into that drawing, and now we have the right layer combination we set up. So sometimes it does this. ArchiCAD, something we've done, just pushes it over into a custom setting, and you can't update when you're in custom. So I should be able to now come in here, and we now have that one still there. We wrote it up, and we can now say we want that on. We want design roof off. Things update, okay. And we've turned that on. Now we've drawn nothing yet. We've drawn nothing. But we've got the layer we want to draw our roof framing with. There's a whole lot of other things on this drawing that are 2D things, like walls below, like notes, like dimensions, like fills, a whole lot of things. But we don't use a design layer for that because they're all 2D. So what do we use? The other one we want to turn on is one called dock roof. See if we've got one. Oh, look at that. We happen to have one called dock roof framing. Beautiful. And that is turned on. So that's fine. We'll leave the sections on because we might need that in a moment. Okay, so really, everything on this drawing here can be done on those two layers. There's nothing else. We're doing roof framing and we're doing some 2D stuff to go with it. Does that make sense? So we don't need a whole lot of other layers turned on. We can if we want to temporarily, like we might want a section on there to see where the cut through is to check heights and things, but generally you can put all the information you want on this drawing on those two layers. Does that make sense to people? It doesn't matter if other layers are turned on, if they're not going to show on here. It doesn't matter if there's things turned on that don't show on here, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to just see what we want to see. Okay, so we've got a couple of layers turned on that we want. We go, okay, that's cool. We've got nothing there, nothing showing, because we haven't drawn anything yet. So where do we start? And this is quite a common point, and this is why I like to do this demo, because you guys go, Richard says do a roof framing plan. Where do we start? Okay, so that's the first point. Set up what we want, where we want, right story, right name, right stuff in our settings. Now we want to draw. So what I suggest to do is how we work here in terms of a roof framing plan is what do our trusses sit on? What do these trusses sit on? Walls. Okay, so the starting point is to draw all the walls below. Because then we've got where the walls go and where the trusses can sit. We can't place the trusses until we know where the trusses go, and the trusses sit on the walls. Okay, so that you go, oh, well, that seems pretty logical, doesn't it? Okay, and I can tell you when you do the lower roof framing plan, you'll do the same. But the walls below in this one, for the other roof plan, are which walls? Because we've got 2 floors. So we want the first floor walls only, because that's what these sit on. So when you do the low roof framing plan, you're going to draw all the ground floor walls first. Yeah? Okay, so this is part of just getting your brain around, you know, what am I doing? What am I doing? Okay, so when we do next week, on Wednesday, the mid-floor framing plan, what walls is the mid-floor framing going to be sitting on? The ground floor walls. Same principle. Yep. So I'm trying to make it sound like you're an 8-year-old, 5-year-old kids. But once you get your head around this, you guys are away laughing. But until that point, you're sitting looking, going, what am I doing? Okay. Is that all right? So, yeah, are you happy I'm treating you like 5-year-olds? Because it's great. If you don't know anything, you're 5-year-olds, aren't you? Really? You're a bit bigger than that, but that's all right. So how do I draw the first 4 walls? I need a trace reference of the first floor plan. Easy. Okay, so if I right click on my first floor plan, shows trace reference. You go, oh, finally, Richard's got something we can use to get our heads around and draw. Okay, so we only need to use our line tool to draw the walls. It can be with the line tool. Yep, so there are our walls below. How do we do this? Well, we go into our documentation one. I'll just get rid of the design one first. We find our line tool. And the very first thing is I look there and go, ooh, that's not the layer I want it to be, is it? What do we want it to be? Dock, roof, framing. So somewhere down here will be dock, roof, roof framing. Okay. And that's why I always look up here first. Before I start anything drawing, I look at that box there and go, is it the right layer that I'm drawing? Okay? So, and I forget all the time too. I start drawing things and go, oh, what layer am I drawing this on? So if you can get into the habit of just looking up here and going, right, what am I doing? Okay, right, what layer? Okay, I'm away. So then you can have a look along here. I can either open up the settings, but you know there's a lot of the information is just sitting here right in front of you. So we know we're going to do just a solid line, makes sense? And we know that the colour here will tell me the line weight. Yep. So for me, I use 0.18 a lot of the time. There it is there. For those I haven't had the discussion with, these are the colours you use in this line here, which are next to the greys, if you're going to use a grey, because they go 0.01, 13, 18, 25, 355, 0.7, 0.1, yeah? So after a while, if you're picking these, you only have to glance at your drawing and go, oh, it's got a green line, therefore it's a 0.13. Oh, it's a red line, it's a 0.18. Oh, it's a da-da-da. So it's there to help you. All of these are to do with preset 3D objects. All of these are to do with materials. All of these stay in colour, in black and white. So these reds here are for revisions. So when you guys get to do revisions, which you're going to do, whenever you do those and put them onto a black and white drawing, they are staying in red. They are red. And you can see your revisions. Yeah? So colours are your friend. They're not about colours, they're about line. Okay? Didn't want to tell you that when you're doing design drawings, because you like colours. Okay, so how do we do this? So we picked our colour, and so I often do things like, if it's things that are rectangular, I might start with my rectangular tool. Now I know the outside of this building is rectangular, so if I click on this point here and draw a rectangle out to the somewhere here, right, finding that line is probably difficult. There, I'll put a rectangle around the outside of the whole building, so that's fine. And then I just pick my rooms that are rectangular, so I look at this room here, go away. And I drag that down to, if I can see it, there. So we are looking at walls. So we have doors. But what's above a door? Wall. Above a door is a wall. We're looking on the tops of the wall, so I don't really care about our doors. Don't care about our doors. We're just going to put all the walls below. The fact that there's a door in that wall, don't care really, unless there is a load-bearing issue around it. So I don't want to do the whole thing, I just want to give you a bit of an idea. So while I've got the rectangular tool, I can just do my rectangular spaces. Is that a space there? Yeah. It is, isn't it? Okay, so I can do rectangular spaces. I'm not going to do the whole lot, I'm just showing you the principle of this. Again, zooming up at times rather than like me put here. And then you'll get to spaces. Let's quickly just do, I shouldn't have to lean forward, I should just make things bigger. We'll get to spaces that aren't rectangular, like here, possibly. So that's when you just change over to your continuous line one, and then you can just run around with your continuous line one because the space isn't rectangular. Does that make sense to people? So it looks like that. Okay. Do I need to do the handrail? No, that's not a wall going up to the ceiling, is it? So I don't need to. So, I'm doing a trace reference for a moment. Easy, eh? There's the basis of it. So the only other thing that I add to these things is I like to be able to differentiate if a wall is load-bearing or not load-bearing. Okay? When I say load-bearing, these are trusses we're going to put on here. So walls are either going to be taking the load from these trusses, or they're not going to be taking the load from the trusses. Is this wall here load-bearing? Yes. Is this wall here load-bearing? Yes. Yes. Is any other wall in that whole thing load-bearing? No. Except we have to have a quick discussion on these two. We have normal trusses. Normal trusses span from here to here, right? Load-bearing, load-bearing. If we have normal trusses on the end, then none of that is load-bearing, that wall there. Does that make sense? However, there is a thing called a gable end truss. So you know Mel and the lecturer said, you know, typical truss has got like a W inside the top cord and the bottom cord, and that makes it a load-bearing type of truss that spans to the outside. They often use end trusses, which are just made up of verticals. And the verticals are to match the studs below, because when you put the cladding on all the way up this triangular part, then you've got the same stud-like members going all the way up to the end. And so the cladding can go all the way up to the top of this ridge. That type of truss doesn't have any of this. So it doesn't, so it loads, it still puts loads on this wall. However, there are ones that are a combination of still having the W type of thing in it, but still and infilled with verticals as well to take the cladding. So my suggestion to you guys is treat these as non-load bearing. Yeah? Okay. But just be aware that there are situations where they might actually be load bearing. Yeah? Happy with that? Okay. So there's our starting point. So the other thing you can do then is just using your fill tool. Go to your fill tool. You can go up here and just have a look and go, is that the layer I want? No. So the first thing again, go and pick your correct layer. And then we have a look at our fill. We go, okay, we just want to have a background fill. And once we've got a background fill, we can pick what that fill is. And I might just use the lightest grey. Yep. Do we want an outline? We don't really need an outline because we've already got outlines around, so the outline can be turned off. And then you can grab, make sure you're on the rectangle tool, and you should be able to grab, and I'll just put it to there because I can't find the point, and then extend that out a little bit to there, and then I can either draw it on the other side, or I can grab that, hit my control button once, get the plus, I've copied it, and I can chuck it on that side as well. And now I have my load-bearing walls. I might just darken those up so you can see it slightly better. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you'll be able to put notes on here eventually and say, load-bearing walls below indicated shaded. Non-load-bearing walls below indicated an outline. And then the builder goes, oh, I get it. You've told them what's going on. Yeah? Okay, so you don't have builders guessing. Why is there shaded walls? Okay, you've got to tell these people these things. You've made a decision to draw it like that. You need a note that tells them that is a load-bearing wall below. That is a non-load-bearing wall. Yeah, all good? All happy? Okay, so there's your starting point. You've done it. You've got everything that these things are going to sit on below drawn. So what do we draw next? Our trusses. Yeah? And guess what? We couldn't get to load the trusses onto here, so I haven't got the truss tool to demo it. But you guys, once you get it loaded in there, you can go into the truss tool and you can set up the truss. You can tell it how wide it needs to be, the pitch of it, all those things. And then you're ready to draw the truss on there. So I'll just do something just to help you guys. I'll just pretend I've got the truss tool. I'm going to use put an outline on it. I'll leave it in purple, and I'm just going to draw myself a pretend truss. And I'll make it heavier so we can see it. And I'm just going to draw quickly here, rectangle. How wide's the truss? Looking down in plan. Oh, more than that. That's weird. I did the wrong one. Oh, I see, I did the wrong one. Yep, sorry. It is 45 wide. Okay, all the members are pretty much 90 top and bottom cord, 90 deep, 45 wide. All the webs inside, 45 wide. So looking down on a truss, 45 wide. Yep. For me, because I'm faking it, how big are our overhangs? 450? Is that right? Oh, 400.
400.
Why do I think it's 450? Okay, so there's my truss and plan. You'll have it looking pretty much like that. So once I've got it there, I can move it. So where do trusses go? So they go flush on the outside of your building. Flush on the outside of your building. Flush on the outside. That's your first truss location. Yeah? Happy with that? Makes sense? So that means the cladding can go all the way up and keep going up into that gable. Yep, so flush on the outside of that building. Even though this isn't real truss. So the other thing we need to do is to be able to, and for your real truss, is to display or to bring to front, because we don't want to see the walls below where the trusses come over the top of it, because the truss is above the walls below. Yep. So you don't be able to see through it and see the wall below. We want it to look like it is in real life sitting on top of the wall. All right? Make sense? Okay, so the only thing that we can really design, because they're SED trusses, is how many of them and how far apart are they. Yeah? That's, we can tell everybody that. That is your designer's job to say how many trusses are there, what centres. Not the design of it, but your set out is your job to do. The set out, not the design of it. Even though you are going to design a little bit of it by telling it what pitch it is and how wide and things like that. Yeah? Okay, so what centres are they? Okay, are there any other options from 1200? If you look in 3604, it'll tell you very little because trusses aren't particularly shown there. So we have 1200. If you're going to put a concrete roof on it, you cannot put them at 1200. You have to put them at 900. Yep. So it depends on your roofing, this decision. I also quite like having them a little bit closer than 1200 because what goes on top of a rafter? What's the next thing that will be on top of a rafter? What do the rafters hold up? They hold up purlins. And what goes on top of the purlins? The roofing. Apart from the other things like roofing underlay, but in terms of general structure. Yep. Okay, so for me, I quite like 900 because the span of your purlins is the spacing of our trusses. Yep. What goes on the underside of a truss? What goes on the underside of the truss? Ceiling battens. That's what holds up your ceiling. Ceiling battens. The ceiling battens are the equivalent of a purlin, but on the underside. Yeah? Because your ceiling lining is affixed to your ceiling battens, which are fixed to your bottom quarter of your truss. Your purlins are on your top quarter of the truss. Yeah? Everybody with me, 5-year-olds? Good? Okay, so this is all stuff you should be really familiar with from Amos's class. But we don't show purlins and ceiling battens on our roof framing plan. Roof framing is trusses and rafters and things, yeah? Ceiling battens are just an incidental thing. Purlins are incidental thing. Anybody know why we can't show purlins on a roof framing plan? You probably don't know, so I'll tell you, 5-year-olds. Because if they're, say, 900 apart, and your roof pitch is really low, they appear to be almost 900 apart. You might have them 900 apart, but if your roof pitch is like that, when you look down on plan, they look really close together. So they're not telling you a true story because your roof is sloped. So you put the purlins on, they're meaningless. Absolutely meaningless because there is not a dimension that you can look at vertically for a purlin. However, when you get to your cross section, you can see them going up and you can make sure they're in the right place. But for a roof framing plan, no purlins. Yeah, makes sense? So rafters, trusses, that's it. Okay, so we get the first one there, right? So let's just say we're going to do them at 1200 centres, yeah? I'm happy if you do them at 900. So if I grab hold of this purlin, this truss, and I click on it and I go to my multiply one, and under spread, it asks you what spacing you would like. Yep, 1200. Okay, so we're multiplying this element, 1200. So I grab this corner. Why this corner? Because it is this side of the truss that's going to end up flush on the outside at the other end. Yeah? So I want to grab this side, so when I start to spread them, I end up with the one on the outside. So you can see what happens if I do them at 1200 centres. This house is not a modular 1200, it's whatever we made it. It's not a modular 1200, so it doesn't actually work. So if you're doing it yourself, you could just then just take that last truss, I won't, yes I can do it. Okay? So you can go, I've set it out from the left hand side, and this last one has to be flush on the outside of my house. Yep. 1200 centres. So we've just decided we've got purlins that go on the top, ceiling battens on the underneath. So in actual fact, how far I put them apart is irrelevant, because all the builder's going to do with a purlin is, here is a truss, I'm going to nail it to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Ceiling battens, oh, here's a truss, or nail it to it. Does that make sense? So here is a situation where you can say, in actual fact, rather than at 1200 centres, I could have them evenly spaced. Because look, this is not evenly spaced, is it? Okay, does that make sense? So I can actually have roof framing evenly spaced, because it doesn't matter where they are, they will have something fixed to them. Yeah? And I'm saying that because when we get to floor framing, you cannot evenly space floor framing, because you put a sheet of material that is a module onto that floor framing. So you can't evenly space things. They must be at 400 or 450 centres. They must be, because you've got to put a piece of particle board that is a module of 400 or 450. Here, it doesn't matter, because they just are fixing a nail to wherever the roof framing is. Does that make sense? Okay? So rather than doing that and ending up with odd things, the other method is you can go, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of these. 12 additional ones, right? Make sense? Because I can't put them any further than 1200 apart, but I can now go, can't see what's going on here, but that'll do. How many do I say? Okay, so if I grab that same point again, go to here, change it to my distribute, and go 12, and go OK, grab the outside point of this one here, I come across here horizontally, holding the shift key, make sure I'm horizontal, line it up with the outside, and I now have the same number of trusses, but they're all evenly distributed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, because you can nail to them. There's no module needed particularly here. So you've got both options. Both options are fine, but that way does it evenly. So, how do you know the difference? And there is a little person by the name of Max that comes into that. Have you ever heard of Max? Max is short for maximum. And if you, on your note, have a note that says proprietary prefabricated roof trusses at 1200 centres, then that's what I drew before. If your note said all of that again, prefabricated, proprietary prefabricated roof trusses at 1200 centres max, so when you chuck that little max onto the end of it, then they know that they're just evenly distributed, but they can't be any further than 1200 apart. Does that make sense? So this little max thing is really, really quite a big key to notes. So if you don't have it, they're just at 1200 centres. Max, they're evenly distributed. Oh, proprietary, it means somebody makes it specially for that thing. As in, any other piece of timber is not proprietary, it's just a piece of timber and it's used. But these are proprietary product made by somebody to bring onto the job to put onto this thing. Yep. Happy difference between max and stuff. So on all your floor framing, you never see the word max because they are going to be at 400 or 450 centres. End of story, no max. But here we can evenly distribute them and they're at 1200 centres max, but in actual fact if we dimension that you'll find they're at something like 1180 or something or other. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay. So there is the basis of your upper floor roof framing plan. So we chuck a few other things on there. It's nice to know where the kind of extent of the roof is. So if we go back to our line tool, let's go down a line weight for the green possibly. Let's pick a, where are we? There's our standard hidden line. And we want to say, here is the extent of the roof. There, oops. I should have, if I'm clever, gone back to my single line, because I'm just drawing single lines. That's there. So there's our, your note would say, line of eaves, dashed or dotted. Either way, dotted or dashed means the same thing. Does that make sense? So the only thing we haven't done yet is our barge overhangs. Okay? So there's lots and lots of ways of doing barges. I do it what I think is the least expensive way and easiest to build and looks good, but it's simple. And what it is on the outside of this top corner here, I run a 90 by 45, same depth, 90 by 45, running up there and a 95 running down there. Yep. Then I use 90 by 45, this is 45 looking down, packers on the outside of that one, and then I do another 90 by 45, 90 by 45, and that is my barge overhang framing. Done. Okay, so I've got solid 90 by 45 packers and then solid again. 3 lots of 90 by 45. 3 times 45 equals 135. So that is the size of my barge overhang. Yeah? So if I draw myself a dotted line down here, now it's not something you have to model. Whoops, might have to look at that more closely. So if I grab that there, draw it down to here, grab it, start moving it, and go 1, 3, 5, enter. I can grab that again, save me drawing twice, go over here, click my control button, so I've copied it, bring it out, 1, 3, 5, enter, highlight that, highlight that, highlight that, and do my little joint, intersect. Yep. Yep. So I now have my barge overhangs dotted. Yep. I mean, you could do what I did and actually just do it if you didn't want to model it, because you're just looking at this in the plan. If you want to model it, you're most welcome to, but it's a bit fiddly because they're all on a slope. You've got to get all the angles right. So you could just use your fill tool and put those on if you want to. Even if you didn't put them on, I don't mind. But and this is what you're going to start to learn. When we dimension anything, we dimension framing. Framing. That is why on our elevations there is no dimensions. That is why on the roof plan that you're also going to do, there is no dimensions. Because you can't dimension things that have flashings, just like you can't dimension a window opening. You dimension the opening it goes into, because you can't dimension these things. So you dimension the framing. So when you have a dimension here, say 400, 135, 135, the builder knows that is for the framing, that is the overhang of the truss. Okay, because on the outside of that, you've got a fascia board, you've got a gutter, but they're all attached to the framing. It's like on your floor plan. What are you dimensioning on the walls? The wall framing. There's no linings, there's no cavity battens, there's no claddings. You dimension the framing. The builder knows they've got to put wall underlay, cavity battens, cladding on the outside, and jib or whatever plasterboard on the inside. Don't care about that. Framing. So we dimension framing, not all these other little things we add on. Does that make sense to you? So that is why on a lot of drawings there are no dimensions, because you're just looking at stuff like elevations, where you're seeing flashings and stuff. You can't dimension any of that. Because what are you looking at? There's flashings and bits that stick over. You can't dimension it. So framing. So here is one we can dimension. Yep. So the other thing, just to make sure it's clear that there's falls in both directions, which you'll pick up on your roof plan itself, but it's always good to plot on the ridge. So it then gives you an idea that this thing is going, make sense? Yep. Then all we've got is a few dimensions here. So where do we put notes? We try if we can to always, if we can, put notes at this end. Why? Because it lines up all the starts of the notes. So it's just tidy. Yeah? So we put all the notes where we can at the right end, if we can. Doesn't always work sometimes. Bloody great big long thing, we need some information over here at times. You might also have to put some. But we try to do it at the right hand end, line them all up. So is everybody clear on notes? So you know that if you go to this one here, label, what's the first thing I do? Top, wall, where am I? Floor framing. No, roof framing. Top roof framing, go into here, pick our text, auto text, top left hand corner one, standard one there, yep. Have a look inside, just check things out. Is it at 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5 high text for everything, guys? And is this one here turn off for me? Richard hates opaque backgrounds. And you're ready to go. Okay? So for me, I just chuck one on. Chuck one on as my starting point. Oh, and it's got a curved thing, so I go back to its settings and make sure the pointer is nice and straight at 45 degrees, ready to roll. You can start doing text in here and whatever you want. Yep, so you set up your first note saying line of keys overhang dotted, and then once you've done that, I just grab it, I hit my little control to copy it, and I put another note somewhere that might say like bearing wall below indicated and shaded. Yep. Large overhang dotted, non-load bearing wall below indicated and outlined. Proprietary prefabricated trusses at 1200 centres max. Ridge line dotted. Yeah.
Richard, how do we get that 135 for barge overhang?
Sorry, how do I?
The barge overhang, we use 45 multiplied by 3, and we get 135.
Correct.
How do we get that, and why we use 45 multiplied by 3?
Okay, so where it gets quite tricky, but it's probably good to know. We haven't talked about it, have we got flat soffits or sloping? Soffits. Flat, okay. So remember, when you get this truss tool, that'll be one of the questions that asks you, have we got flat soffit? Because the truss tool will put on a flat soffit setup for you. Yep. Okay. If you've got sloping soffits, what happens is the lining goes along on the underside, the soffit lining, and so it's on the underside of the top chord of the truss. You can follow me. When you go off the end of the house and hit the barge, if you have 90 by 40 framing in the same plane as the top chord, then that soffit lining can go up that barge. So it's a really handy thing to have, especially if you're doing sloping soffit. Doesn't matter so much if you've got a flat soffit, because you don't get that quite that same relationship at the end. You get what's called a box end, flat end. But it's always good to keep all your framing in the same line. It means your linings can all match. Because you've got to remember, they've got to go around the corner and match. And you don't ever think about that. You guys don't, because you're 5-year-olds, so you don't think about things like that. I'm sorry, just being rude. So there are reasons why that's good to keep all that framing 90 deep, because your top chord is 90 deep, because your eaves overhangs are 90 deep, and you can actually line all your linings up together. They all meet on the corner. So there's quite a good reason. It doesn't matter so much with flat, but I think you've got sloping ones for your rafters, for over the living room, I think. I don't think they're flat, because you've got that little push-out chimney, little bit that sticks out and things. So just be aware of that. I think you've got sloping ones for there. So yes, it is just trying to emulate the same height as your overhangs of your trusses around the corner. I don't know if that helps, if your brain can get that clear. Anyway, so does that make sense? So that can be the basis of all these framing plans, if they're sitting on something below. Obviously your subfloor framing won't have any walls below, will it? Because it's the ground below. But all your mid-floor and roof framing will all sit on walls below. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
I've just got one question.
Yeah.
You know when Mel was showing us how to import the truss?
Yes.
I just missed one step.
Okay. Because he knows how, he's set all that up. This is kind of Unitech stuff. I go, not sure exactly. So yeah, check with him if you're having problems bringing in the full truss, and you need the half trusses for when you're doing your lower roof framing. So those. Yep. So you can fake it, like I've done, because that's exactly what your roof framing plan will look like, no different. Except I've overemphasised the fill colour there. You don't have to have it so strong.
What's the reason for using the other ones to just go 3-dimensional?
Yeah, well, when you do a cross section, you'll see your trusses side on. So they won't appear at all because they're just filled. So it's all to do with your cross sections. You'll see it. Cool. Away you go. Smash it out. Easy. It's easy. Once you know how. Now the